He was just a struggling single dad trying to get his daughter through a long night in the ER. She was a stranger, shivering, bleeding, and barely able to stand. When he gave up his place in line for her, he never imagined that one quiet act of kindness would change everything. If you believe in the power of compassion, second chances, and the kind of stories that stay with you long after they're told, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now let's begin this unforgettable journey. A struggling single dad gave up his spot in the ER for her. The doctor gasped when he saw her name. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and merciless. It was nearing midnight in the ER at Jackson Memorial Hospital, and the air was thick with tension and disinfectant. Every plastic chair in the cramped waiting room was filled. People coughed, groaned, and whispered complaints under their breath. A baby wailed in the corner. Somewhere down the hall, a code blue was called and the world briefly stood still. Liam Harris sat hunched on the last seat by the vending machine, his hoodie soaked through from the freezing rain outside. His arms cradled Ellie, his 6-year-old daughter, her head tucked into his chest. Her forehead burned against his chin. She was hot to the touch, her breathing shallow and wheezy, the unmistakable signs of another asthma attack. He'd already used her emergency inhaler. Twice. He hadn't meant to wait this long, but by the time his shift at the site ended demolition cleanup with no overtime, the clinics were closed. The ER was his only option, and tonight it looked like half of Chicago had the same idea. His eyes flicked toward the admissions board. Next, Harris Liam blinked on the screen. Relief bloomed in his chest, sharp and almost painful. He whispered against Ellie's damp hair. "Just a few more minutes, baby. We're almost there." That's when it happened. The automatic doors hissed open with a rush of icy wind. A woman stumbled through, half running, half falling. She was drenched to the bone, her thin coat clung to her, streaked with rain and something darker. Blood. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and as she moved forward she coughed violently into her hand. Then she collapsed hard right onto the linoleum floor. Gasps rippled through the room. But no one moved. People shifted uncomfortably, muttering. "Junkie," someone whispered. "Probably drunk," another said. A security guard started toward her but hesitated when she curled into herself and began coughing up more blood. Liam stared, frozen. The woman looked barely older than 30. Her clothes weren't cheap, just worn. Her boots were expensive but muddy. Her fingernails were painted but chipped. A nurse at the front desk called out Harris. "Mr. Harris, room 3 is ready." He blinked, stood. Ellie stirred weakly against him, letting out a small whimper. The nurse repeated, impatient now. Sir Liam took a step forward, then stopped. The woman on the floor was struggling to sit up. Her breathing was ragged and blood now stained the floor beneath her. The security guard was still standing back, unsure of whether to touch her. Nobody offered help. Nobody but Ellie. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Daddy. She's sick." Liam looked down at his daughter. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glassy. She was still in danger. He knew that. But somehow in her weakest moment she was worried about a stranger. That did it. He walked straight to the reception desk. "Give her my spot." The nurse frowned. "Sir, your daughter. She's stable for now. She's had medication, her breathing's not worsening. She can wait." "But give it to her," he repeated firmly. The nurse hesitated, then finally nodded. "Get me a gurney," she called out. They rushed to the woman, lifted her gently, and wheeled her away. Liam returned to his seat, settling Ellie back onto his chest. She shivered, her little arms wrapping around him like ivy. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," she murmured, and he felt something twist in his chest. He pressed his lips to her forehead. "You make me braver than I am." An older man across from him, a heavy-set guy in a mechanic's jacket, snorted. "That's noble. But you might have just cost your kid her lungs." Liam didn't respond. He didn't need to explain it to a stranger. Because in the back of his mind, he saw Jenna. His wife, pale and sweating in their car 3 years ago, writhing in pain while Liam banged on a clinic door that was closed for the weekend. By the time they found a hospital that would take her, it was too late. That helplessness never left him. It lived inside him like a second heart. So tonight he chose differently. A few minutes passed. Ellie dozed off against him, her breathing shallow but steady. Liam stared at the buzzing light above them, blinking slowly. He didn't regret what he'd done, but part of him was scared. He couldn't afford to lose her, too. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the hallway. A tall man in scrubs, Dr. Monroe, his badge red, appeared at the front desk. He looked pale and shaken. "Who brought her in?" he demanded. "The woman who sent her in." The nurse hesitated, pointing at Liam. He gave up his spot, said she needed it more. Dr. Monroe turned to stare at Liam, then back at the nurse. "I need her chart. Now." He tapped on the tablet in his hand. When the name loaded, his face changed. He went still, silent. Then, "Get the administrator on the phone. Tell them we have Julia Jennings in critical care." The room fell quiet. The nurse blinked. The Julia Jennings from Dr. Monroe nodded once. Liam, still rocking Ellie gently in his arms, didn't notice the way everyone was suddenly looking at him. He had no idea that the woman he'd just saved was one of the most powerful names in the city. No idea that his single act of kindness was about to change everything. Liam sat perfectly still, his arms wrapped protectively around Ellie, the weight of her small body grounding him. The antiseptic-scented air buzzed with whispers now. A woman who had been silent for hours suddenly leaned over and asked, "Did the doctor say Julia Jennings, as in Greenstone Medical?" Liam looked at her blankly. "Who?" The woman's eyes widened. "She's the CEO, one of the youngest in the country. Just took over Greenstone a few months ago. She's worth, I don't know, a fortune." Liam blinked. It didn't mean much to him. He had no stocks, no savings. The only green in his wallet was the crumpled $5 bill he'd kept in case Ellie needed water or crackers from the vending machine. The only fortune he understood was the quiet rhythm of his daughter's breathing against his chest. Across the room, a nurse on the phone was murmuring in hushed urgency. Another typed something rapidly at the front desk. The room, once full of restless patients and low groans, was suddenly alert, buzzing like a shaken hive. But Liam tuned it all out. He shifted Ellie slightly, cradling her closer. She stirred, whimpered softly, and mumbled, "Is the lady okay? I think so, sweetheart," he whispered. "They're taking care of her." Ellie nodded sleepily. She was scared. He swallowed. Yeah, she was. Liam's mind drifted to his wife Jenna and the night she died. The memory was like an old scar, faded but still tender. He had taken her to a small clinic when the abdominal pain wouldn't stop. She'd insisted it was probably food poisoning. But by the time they were redirected twice due to non-emergency status, her appendix had ruptured. By the time someone finally took her in, it had turned septic. And just like that, she was gone. He remembered begging the receptionist to push her up the list, remembered the way they'd looked at him, just another broke guy with no insurance. Nothing he could say or do made a difference. That night had taught him something brutal. Sometimes kindness wasn't enough to save someone. But maybe tonight it was. He held on to that thought. A man in a charcoal blazer, hospital security, approached. Mr. Harris Liam stiffened. "Yeah. Can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Ellie stirred again, her arms tightening around his neck. He kissed her temple. "I'm right here, baby. Just talking." The guard led him toward the hallway where it was quieter away from the curious stares. They passed a nurse's station. Two staffers glanced up, then immediately looked away, whispering to each other the moment he passed. In the corner of a sterile hallway stood Dr. Monroe. Tall, gray-haired, sleeves rolled up past his elbows. His face was calm but studied Liam with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Mr. Harris, the doctor," said, offering his hand. "I wanted to thank you personally." Liam shook it, confused. "I didn't do anything special. You did something very few would have done. You gave up your daughter's place in line. For someone you didn't know. Liam's eyes flicked down the hallway. She looked like she was dying. What was I supposed to do? Walk past. That's just it, the doctor said quietly. Most people do. Dr. Monroe hesitated, then glanced around before lowering his voice. The woman you helped tonight is Julia Jennings. She's not just a CEO, she's the executive director of our hospital's largest funding partner. She has more influence on the operations of this place than anyone short of the board of directors. And tonight she came in off the street. No security detail. No entourage, no assistant. She didn't want anyone to know. Liam frowned. Why, we don't know. She may have wanted to observe the ER on her own terms. See how her foundation's funding affects real lives. It's something she's known for blending in. Seeing the cracks no one reports in spreadsheets. Liam rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't recognize her. You weren't supposed to. But now... Dr. Monroe's gaze softened. Now she wants to speak with you. Personally, Liam shook his head. Look, I didn't do it for thanks. I just did what felt right. My daughter's still sick. We just need to be seen and go home. And we'll make that happen, Monroe said gently. But I think you should talk to her. She asked for you by description. Specifically, the man in the hoodie with the little girl. Liam hesitated. Ellie was still unwell, but deep down a part of him wondered. What kind of woman remembers kindness through pain? He sighed. Let me check on my daughter first. They returned to the waiting room. Ellie was curled up in the chair, small and still cheeks flushed but peaceful. A nurse knelt beside her, monitoring her breathing. She looked up as Liam approached. She's stable, the nurse said kindly, but we'll get her in next. Promise. Liam touched his daughter's hand. Be right back, champ. Ellie opened one eye. The lady. She's awake. She wants to say thank you. Ellie smiled weakly. She'll like you. Liam's throat tightened. He followed the guard through a set of restricted doors and down a quiet hallway that smelled like antiseptic and fresh paint. As they reached room 6B, the guard gestured toward the partially open door. She's awake. Liam took a breath and stepped inside. The room was softly lit. Julia Jennings lay on the bed, an IV in her arm, her skin pale but no longer ashen. Her eyes, sharp gray-blue alert, met his the second he entered. She smiled faintly. You stayed, she said. I wasn't sure if you would. I almost didn't, he admitted. She studied him, then looked past him as if visualizing the whole ER again. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't hesitate. Why? Liam stepped closer, folding his arms. Because you needed help. That was enough. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then she whispered almost to herself, It's never enough. Until someone decides to make it enough. Liam didn't understand what she meant, not yet. But something in her tone and the fragile steadiness of her voice made him realize this meeting was only the beginning. Dr. Monroe had worked in emergency medicine for over 30 years. He had seen gang violence, pile-up collisions, opioid overdoses, and young mothers who gave birth in waiting rooms with no one by their side. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the moment he tapped the screen of his hospital tablet and saw the name flash back at him. Julia Marie Jennings. He read it again, thinking perhaps exhaustion was playing tricks on his eyes. But there it was, bold, unmistakable. Julia Jennings, CEO of Greenstone Medical Holdings, one of the youngest executives in the country, heir to a pharmaceutical empire and recently appointed director of the foundation that had single-handedly saved their ER from shutting down during the budget crisis. The very foundation that bore her family's name. And she was here, alone, bleeding in his emergency ward, and she had entered without announcement, without protection, without pretense. He turned to the attending nurse beside him, voice a notch above a whisper. Page, Hospital Administration. Now. The nurse blinked. Wait, you mean that Julia Jennings gets security to clear the hallway and do it quietly? No leaks. In room 6B, Julia lay still, her breathing slower now, more controlled thanks to the IV fluids and stabilizers. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind, always sharp even under strain, was racing. She had tried to enter the hospital unnoticed. She hadn't told her assistant. She hadn't brought her driver or security detail. The entire point of tonight was to see truly, see how her hospital served the people it claimed to help. But the pain had been worse than she expected. The stress-bleeding ulcer, likely triggered by weeks of sleepless nights and mounting pressure, had erupted suddenly violently. She had barely made it inside. And then she remembered him. The man in the soaked hoodie. The little girl in his arms. The warmth in his voice when he told the nurse to take her instead. His eyes had been tired, but not bitter. Wary, but not cold. It wasn't just that he gave up his place, it was how he did it. Quietly, without fanfare, without asking for anything in return. And that made all the difference. Meanwhile, out in the waiting room, whispers were spreading like wildfire. A young man in a denim jacket leaned toward a woman holding a baby. They're saying that woman's some kind of billionaire. A nurse nearby hushed them sharply. Keep your voice down, no gossiping. But it was too late. Every patient waiting now knew something was happening. Some looked impressed. Others rolled their eyes. Only Liam remained unmoved, sitting beside Ellie, who was now being wheeled toward an exam room by a nurse. "You'll be okay, Pumpkin," he whispered, stroking her damp hair. Ellie smiled through cracked lips. "Is the lady okay, too?" He nodded. "She's doing better." "Good," she whispered. She looked sad. The observation hit him harder than he expected. Sad. That woman had looked terrified, sick, vulnerable, but sad. Back in the hallway, Dr. Monroe stood facing the hospital's director of operations, a woman named Angela Bryant. She had rushed down in heels and a blazer still wrinkled from her car seatbelt. "You're absolutely sure it's her?" Angela asked. "I just spoke with her. It's her, and she doesn't want media attention. Says she came alone for a reason." Angela cursed under her breath. "This could either make or break our funding for the next 5 years." Monroe nodded grimly. "We've got to handle it right." Angela hesitated. "Who was the man that brought her in?" "He didn't bring her in. He gave up his daughter's spot in line so she could be seen." Angela's jaw dropped. "Seriously? Seriously?" They exchanged a look that spoke volumes. In their world full of donors who liked to be praised and patients who often felt entitled, that kind of sacrifice was rare, almost extinct. Inside room 6B, Julia sat up slowly as Liam stepped inside. The lighting was low, the kind of soft calm she usually despised in corporate meetings but welcomed now. He stood near the door, awkward and hesitant. "You didn't have to send for me," he said quietly. "I did," she replied. "You saved my life." He shook his head. "All I did was give up a turn in line." "Anyone would have." She smiled faintly. "No, Mr. Harris. That's where you're wrong. Very few people would have done that, not with a sick child in their arms." Her eyes softened, especially in this country. Liam didn't answer. He wasn't sure what to say to a woman like this, someone who had power and presence, but spoke like someone who understood pain. "I saw you," she said, "before I passed out. You didn't even hesitate. That's not normal." He shrugged. "I didn't do it to be noble. I did it because I know what it's like to wait too long. My wife, she died because we were sent away once. It never leaves you." Julia's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry." He nodded, folding his arms, suddenly needing distance from the emotion pressing in. "I don't want anything from you," he said firmly. "No press, no stories. My daughter and we just want to get back to normal." Julia nodded slowly. "And you'll have that, but just so you know, this moment, it won't go unnoticed. Not by me." There was a long pause. Then she added more quietly, "There are people who try to change the system from the top down. I've been trying for years, but you did it from the bottom up, just by doing the right thing. No cameras, no spotlight, just human decency." Liam shifted. Her words struck somewhere deep and uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. Julia smiled again, and this time it was lighter. "I don't know who you are, Mr. Harris, but I intend to find out." Back in the hallway, Angela was already drafting a quiet internal memo. No press releases, no grand gestures yet. But she knew this story wouldn't stay quiet forever, because sometimes the smallest kindness in the darkest moment becomes the story that changes everything. The hallway lights flickered once, just a glitch in the old wiring, but enough to jolt Liam back into focus. He stood just outside Julia's room now, with the sterile smell of antiseptic curling around him. A nurse had just updated him. Ellie was being examined and her breathing had stabilized. She'd likely be discharged with a prescription and an inhaler refill. Relief seeped into his bones like warmth after a bitter wind. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to exhale. But what lingered wasn't relief. It was the way Julia had looked at him, as if she saw something in him even he couldn't name. Not pity, not admiration, something quieter, something deeper. He sat again in the waiting room while they finished with Ellie's paperwork. The chair squeaked under him. Around him, the room had quieted. New patients trickled in, but the earlier electricity had faded. The drama had passed. What remained was exhaustion and memory. 2 years ago, the old Ford sputtered outside the urgent care center. Liam had parked illegally. There was no time to find a proper spot. Jenna was doubled over in the passenger seat, clutching her stomach, her voice weak and tremulous. "We just need to be seen." He'd begged the front desk nurse. She hadn't even looked up. "If you don't have insurance, you'll need to go to County General." "It's 20 minutes away," he'd said. "She's in pain. Please." "I'm sorry," the woman had replied, her tone automatic. "We're not authorized to treat uninsured patients with potential surgical needs." By the time they reached County General, Jenna had passed out. Septic shock. Too late. Too late. A small voice broke through the fog. Daddy Liam looked up. Ellie stood in front of him, a nurse beside her holding a discharge folder and a plastic bag of medications. "She's all set," the nurse said with a kind smile. She was very brave. Liam stood kneeling to Ellie's level and brushing a curl away from her cheek. Her skin was cooler now, her eyes clearer. "You okay, Munchkin?" She nodded. "They gave me stickers." He chuckled softly. "Then I guess we're good." But Ellie didn't move. Instead, she tilted her head, peering up at him with that too-old look she sometimes wore, Jenna's look. Thoughtful. Steady. "You looked sad again," she said softly. He tried to smile. Just tired. "Is it because of Mommy?" Liam froze for a moment, then nodded. "A little." Ellie looked down. "I miss her." "Me too." She leaned against him, her small hands curling into his coat. "You helped the lady tonight," she said. "Just like you wanted someone to help Mommy." Liam's throat tightened. "Yeah, Mommy would be proud of you." He didn't respond right away. What could he say to that? Instead, he wrapped his arms around her and held on. They walked toward the exit together, Ellie's little hand tucked in his, the bag of meds swinging in his other hand. The night rain had turned to a drizzle, just a whisper against the pavement. His truck sat under a flickering streetlight, one headlight out one door that didn't shut right. But it was theirs. It got them here. As he opened the door for Ellie, a voice behind him stopped him. "Mr. Harris." He turned. It was Dr. Monroe again, but this time he wasn't alone. Standing just behind him was Angela Bryant, crisp in a navy coat and sharp heels, her posture polished and practiced. "Sorry to stop you," Angela said. "I'm the director of operations here." Liam tensed. "Is there a problem?" "Not at all," she said quickly. "Quite the opposite. Ms. Jennings asked me personally to speak with you. She understands you may not want attention, but, Well, she doesn't forget people. Liam shifted Ellie behind him slightly. I appreciate that. But like I told her, I'm not looking for anything. Angela smiled a little softer now. I understand. But you should know. Your story made its way through our staff tonight, and I don't think anyone here will look at that waiting room the same again. Liam said nothing. He wasn't sure what to say to a woman who looked like she managed half the city's budget from her phone. Angela extended a business card. If you ever want to talk about anything, job placement, community partnerships, just consider us a resource. He hesitated, then took it, tucking it into his wallet. Thanks. Angela nodded, gave Ellie a little wave, and disappeared back into the hospital. The truck was cold when he started it, the heater groaning to life slowly. Liam glanced at Ellie now, buckled in, fiddling with her stickers. You still thinking about the lady? He asked. She nodded. Will we see her again? Liam shrugged. I don't know. Ellie was quiet a moment. She looked lonely. Liam turned to her. What do you mean? She looked like someone who didn't have a daddy like you. That hit him harder than he expected. He looked out the windshield, the hospital glowing behind them, its neon-red emergency sign blinking into the dark. Maybe they would never see Julia again. Or maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of their story. He shifted into drive, his voice quiet but steady. We'll see where the road takes us. That night, after Ellie had fallen asleep in her small twin bed and the house was finally quiet, Liam pulled out the card Angela had given him. He stared at it for a long while. Then he slipped it into Jenna's old recipe box on the kitchen shelf. Not to forget, but to remember when the time was right. Because sometimes the past couldn't be changed, but the future that was still unwritten. Morning broke with a haze that painted Chicago in soft silver. Atop the high floors of Greenstone Medical's corporate tower, Julia Jennings sat wrapped in a thick sweater on her office couch, a mug of tea cooling beside her. She hadn't returned home the night before. Against her assistant's frantic advice, she'd insisted on discharging herself as soon as the IV fluids had stabilized her vitals. Julia hated being coddled. She hated looking weak. But most of all, she hated pretending she hadn't been changed by that night. Her hospital visit was supposed to be anonymous, a spontaneous drop-in to gauge how the system her name funded truly worked. But things had unraveled fast. The ulcer had ruptured. The bleeding had come without warning. She hadn't even made it to the receptionist's desk before the world blurred and she collapsed. And then, him. Liam Harris. That moment looped in her mind like a song she couldn't unhear. The image of him soaked to the bone, a child shivering in his arms, exhaustion carved into his posture, yet he still gave her his place in line. Not for attention. Not to be noble. Just because he saw someone who needed help more than he did. Julia had known 100 men more powerful than Liam. Not one of them would have done what he did. She rose from the couch slowly and walked to the tall windows that looked down over the river. People below looked like ants rushing to work, bundled in coats hunched against the morning chill. All strangers. And yet somehow that man, that father, felt closer to her than the board of directors sitting 3 floors below. There was a knock. Julia turned. Come in. Her assistant, Maya, entered cautiously holding a tablet and a concerned expression. You're supposed to be home, Maya said carefully. Julia waved it off. I'm fine. That's debatable. I'm functioning. That's still debatable. Julia managed a smirk. Maya, who had worked for her for 3 years, was one of the few people who didn't tiptoe around her status. She appreciated that, especially today. Maya sat on the edge of the leather chair and held up the tablet. I pulled the internal footage from the ER lobby like you asked. No audio, just video. But it's all there. The moment he stood up. The way he talked to the nurse. You can even see the girl whisper something to him before he decides. Julia leaned forward as the footage played. She watched herself stumble in, watched her own body fall. But more than that, she watched Liam's. The stillness before movement. The glance at his daughter. The hesitation. Then the decision. He stood. He walked. He didn't look back. "Pause it," she said softly. Maya froze the frame where Liam gently handed his daughter back her jacket, ruffling her hair before turning to the desk. Julia swallowed hard. "He looks tired," she said. "He is," Maya replied gently. "I had the team run a quiet background check just based on hospital info. He's a single dad, construction worker, widowed, lives in South Shore, no legal issues, no complaints, no debts, but also no savings." Julia turned from the screen. "Did he call the number I left for him?" Maya shook her head. "Not yet." Julia crossed her arms. "He will, or he won't." That gave Julia pause. "He didn't ask for a reward," Maya said. "He didn't even ask who you were. You think maybe that's what made you notice him, but maybe it's what makes him different." Julia looked away, her jaw tight. "I owe him my life." "Maybe," Maya said gently, "you owe him something else." That afternoon, Julia made a phone call to a name she hadn't spoken in years. Jacob Fisher, her mentor, and one of the founding board members of the Jennings Foundation. He answered on the second ring. "Julia," he said, "I heard you were in the ER last night. News traveled fast." "I'm fine," she replied, "but I need to make a personnel decision that doesn't go through traditional channels." There was a pause. "Go on. I want to offer a field leadership position to someone. A man named Liam Harris. Construction background, community roots. No formal degrees, but the kind of integrity we can't teach. You sure about this? I've never been more sure. He'll need to be vetted. He already passed the only test that mattered." Jacob chuckled. "This about gratitude or about vision?" Julia smiled faintly. "Both." Later that evening on the other side of the city, Liam sat at the kitchen table sorting through unopened mail and junk coupons. Ellie was upstairs humming to herself, her asthma finally calmed, her cheeks flushed from a warm bath. He opened a plain white envelope. Inside was a single-typed note. "Mr. Harris, you saved a life. Let's talk about how you might help save more. Julia Jennings." Below it, a phone number. No pressure, no branding. Just an invitation. He stared at it for a long time. Then, without thinking, he looked up at the recipe box on the shelf. Jenna's recipe box. The card from the hospital director was still there, tucked inside next to a handwritten apple pie recipe neither he nor Jenna had ever gotten around to trying. Liam wasn't a man who believed in signs, but maybe tonight he could make an exception. Because maybe what he did in the ER wasn't the end of something. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning. The next morning began like any other in Liam Harris's house, quiet, simple, and a little frayed at the edges. The radiators hissed and clanked, struggling to push warmth through the drafty South Shore duplex. The smell of instant oatmeal drifted from the kitchen as Liam stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of the one dress shirt he owned that didn't have a paint stain. He hadn't called the number yet. The note from Julia sat on the counter beside his toothbrush, its crisp edges now slightly bent from how many times he'd unfolded and refolded it. "You saved a life. Let's talk about how you might help save more." He had stared at that line for hours the night before, turning it over in his mind like a puzzle piece he wasn't sure where to place. He'd made decisions his whole life out of necessity. Where to work, when to quit, which bills to pay first. But this felt like a decision about purpose. And purpose was harder. Ellie peeked around the doorway, still in her pajamas, her hair a wild halo from sleep. "Is that the lady's letter?" Liam smiled gently. "Yeah, baby, it is. You gonna call her?" He hesitated. "I'm thinking about it." Ellie stepped closer, barefoot on the cold tile. She looked like someone who doesn't have people. Liam blinked. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Ellie said softly. She looked like she needed someone who isn't afraid to tell her the truth. Someone kind, like you. Liam knelt, brushing her hair behind her ears. "You're a lot smarter than your dad." She shrugged. "I just see things. He made the call at 9:17 a.m. The line rang once, then twice, and then a familiar voice picked up. Liam Harris. It was Julia, calm, composed. But there was something in her tone, something warmer than formality. Familiar even. "I wasn't sure if you'd call," she said. "I wasn't sure either." A beat of silence. Then she said, "I'm glad you did." They met later that day at the Grove, a nonprofit community hub Julia's foundation had helped rebuild 2 years ago. The center offered after-school tutoring, job skills workshops, and warm meals, all the things Liam wished had existed when he was a kid. He walked in and found Julia waiting in a modest conference room, dressed casually this time, jeans, a navy blazer, and a simple ponytail. No designer labels, no entourage. She stood when he entered. "Thanks for coming." He gave a half shrug. "You asked." She gestured to a seat. "I didn't want to meet in an office tower. I thought you'd appreciate something that felt real." He looked around the room, worn chairs, handmade posters, a smell of crayons and old coffee. It did feel real. Julia sat across from him, her hands clasped lightly on the table. "I've been thinking a lot about the way we build change," she began. "Most foundations operate from the top down. But what happened in that ER, what you did reminded me that the most powerful moments of change start small, human, unseen." Liam tilted his head. "You want me to be a spokesperson?" She smiled. "No. I want you to work with me." He blinked. "Doing what exactly? Project oversight? Community liaison? You've got the experience in construction, and more importantly, you understand people who don't trust suits and slogans." He frowned slightly. "I'm not a college grad. I've never written a grant. I've never even been on LinkedIn." Julia leaned in. "You have something better. You have credibility. You walk into a room and people know you've lived what they're living. And that's not something I can teach." Liam looked down at his calloused hands. "I'm not sure I belong in a place like this." "You belonged in that ER more than anyone else in it," she said softly. "And you didn't wait for permission to do what was right." He sat back, processing. She waited. Then he asked quietly, "Why me?" Julia hesitated, her eyes dropping for the first time. "Because I used to be like Ellie." Liam looked up. "I used to wait in ERs with my mom. We didn't have money. I learned early what it meant to be invisible. And when you grow up like that, you spend the rest of your life trying to matter, trying not to be powerless again." She looked at him then, her voice steady but thick with memory. "I built a life with walls so high no one could touch me. But last night I wasn't a CEO. I was just a sick woman on the floor. And you saw me. Not because of my name, not because of my status. You just saw someone who needed help." Liam's throat tightened. Julia continued, "That's the kind of person I want building the future with me." They walked out together as the afternoon light stretched across the pavement. Kids were gathering near the entrance for after-school snacks. A teenage girl tripped on the steps, and Liam instinctively reached out to catch her elbow before she fell. She mumbled thanks and ran off, cheeks pink. Julia watched quietly. "You don't even notice when you do it, do you?" she asked. "Do what? Step in? Just help." Liam shrugged. "I guess it's how I was raised, or maybe it's just who I became after losing someone." She nodded slowly. "Loss has a way of shaping what we give." They stood by his truck, the moment stretching. "You don't have to decide now," she said, "but the offer is real. Not because I owe you, but because I believe in what you can do." He looked at her and for the first time saw not the CEO, not the name, but the woman behind it. Human, flawed, grateful. "I'll think about it," he said. She smiled. "That's all I ask." That night, as he tucked Ellie into bed, she looked up and whispered, "Was the lady nice?" "She was," he said softly. "Will we see her again?" Liam paused, brushing a curl from her cheek. "I think we just might." Because maybe, just maybe, kindness wasn't a detour. It was the beginning of a new road. The phone call came 2 days later while Liam was hammering drywall into a renovated 2-flat on 73rd Street. His old buddy Marco had thrown him the job for a week under the table. No benefits, but enough to cover groceries and Ellie's meds. He stepped outside when the phone buzzed in his pocket. Mr. Harris said the voice on the line, polished, professional, rehearsed. "This is Alexis from Greenstone's executive office. Ms. Jennings asked me to extend an official thank you and to inform you that she's arranged a monetary gesture of appreciation. A gift of $15,000 has been allocated to your name, no strings attached. You can claim it at your convenience." Liam froze mid-step on the gravel path behind the building. His boots crunched into a spot of broken glass. He looked toward the sky, gray and low with impending snow. 15,000, he repeated slowly. "Yes, sir. Miss Jennings wanted to express her gratitude for what you did at the hospital. The funds can be wired immediately." He was silent. His breath fogged the air. That much money would change a lot. Fix his truck, pay rent for 6 months, finally take Ellie to the dentist, maybe even buy her a new coat that didn't come from a donation bin. But the idea of taking something for what he'd done sat heavy in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice quiet but certain. "I appreciate it, but I can't accept it." There was a pause. "I don't understand. I didn't help her because I thought it would come back to me. I did it because it was the right thing to do. That's enough." Another beat of silence. Then the voice replied more gently this time. "I'll let Ms. Jennings know." When Liam ended the call, he didn't feel noble or brave or virtuous. He just felt right. That evening after dinner, he told Ellie. $15,000, she repeated, eyes wide. "Yeah." She blinked. "That's like 100 million stickers," he chuckled. "Something like that, and you said no." Liam leaned forward on his elbows. "What would I be teaching you if I took that money for being kind?" Ellie's brow furrowed in deep thought. "That being kind is worth money, or that it's only worth doing when money's involved." She looked down at her chipped pink plastic cup filled with milk, then nodded slowly. "I think you made the right choice." "So do I." Then she added, "But can we still get donuts this weekend?" He grinned. "Absolutely." The next morning there was a knock on the door. Liam, half-dressed and carrying a mug of reheated coffee, opened it to find Julia standing on his stoop. No driver, no security. Just her holding a bakery bag and 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you might not like suits showing up with envelopes," she said. He blinked. "How did you even know where I live?" She raised a brow. "Come on, I'm Julia Jennings." Liam stepped aside, stunned. "You came all the way here. I wanted to look you in the eye when I said thank you. For turning down the check." He scratched the back of his neck. "I wasn't trying to make a point." "I know," she said. "That's why it mattered." She looked around the small living room, clean but worn. The threadbare couch, the stack of library books, the hand-drawn pictures on the fridge. "Ellie's at school?" she asked. "Yeah, loves it. Teacher says she's a natural leader." Julia smiled. Not surprising. They sat and Liam took the coffee. She handed him a jelly donut. "I asked the bakery lady what a 6-year-old would choose. She didn't hesitate." He laughed. "You didn't have to come all the way here." "Maybe I didn't. But I needed to," she said. "You see, people give me things all the time. Praise attention partnerships. But what you gave me that night was different. It was dignity, in a moment when I felt anything but." Liam looked down at the donut. "I didn't think I was giving anything. That's what makes it rare." They sat in silence for a moment. The snow had begun to fall outside, soft and quiet. "I heard you're still thinking about the job," she said. "I am. What's holding you back?" He was quiet for a long time before answering. "I've spent most of my life trying to stay afloat, paying bills, surviving layoffs, patching holes literally and figuratively. I'm not used to thinking bigger. I don't know if I belong in your world." Julia leaned forward. What if I told you it's not my world? What if I told you I've been trying to rebuild a world where people like you set the foundation? He looked at her eyes, narrowed. You mean that? More than I've ever meant anything. He thought of Ellie, of Jenna, of the man he used to be, of the man he was trying to become. Then he nodded. I'm in. Julia smiled, genuine, unguarded. Good, because I've already scheduled your orientation for Monday. He laughed. Of course you did. As she stood to leave, Julia turned at the door. You know, I never believed in fate. But lately, I'm starting to think it believes in us. Liam leaned against the doorframe, coffee in hand, watching her walk down the snowy steps. Maybe he said. Or maybe kindness just has a way of circling back. And for the first time in years, as the snow fell gently across South Shore, Liam Harris didn't feel like a man surviving. He felt like a man beginning. Monday morning came dressed in quiet sunlight, the kind that slipped through windows without asking permission. Liam stood outside the towering glass doors of Greenstone's Community Development Division, his worn boots planted firmly on the concrete, his heart thudding a slow, uncertain rhythm. He had changed out of his usual hoodie and jeans today. He wore clean khakis, a button-down shirt, and the one decent jacket Jenna had bought for him before she passed. Ellie had insisted he wear it, said it made him look like someone who builds bridges. Maybe she was right, because what he was about to step into felt a lot like crossing one. The lobby was warm and open, nothing like the corporate towers he'd imagined. There were photos of neighborhoods being rebuilt, murals painted by kids from local schools, and faces, real faces smiling from framed project snapshots. It didn't feel like a place where suits barked orders. It felt like possibility. At the front desk, a kind-eyed receptionist smiled. Mr. Harris. He nodded. Ms. Jennings is waiting for you upstairs. Julia was in the conference room when he entered, standing beside a wall lined with blueprints and floor plans. She wore a slate-gray turtleneck and slacks, her hair tucked behind one ear. No makeup today, just herself, sharp and composed. Morning, she said with a smile that didn't feel obligatory. You really meant it, huh? Liam said, glancing at the plans. I don't offer things I don't intend to follow through on. He stepped closer, hands in his pockets, trying to wrap his head around what he was seeing. Diagrams of community centers, food banks, affordable housing, real places with real impact. I thought you meant maybe some part-time advisory thing, he said. Julia looked amused. What I offered you is bigger. This isn't a charity job. It's a leadership position, field manager for Greenstone's new initiative, Roots Rebuilt. She tapped the blueprint closest to her. We're launching a pilot in 5 neighborhoods. South Shore is one of them. We need people from the community to lead the teams that build the infrastructure, hire local workers, and ensure everything reflects the people it's meant to serve. Liam's brows furrowed. And you want me to run? 1. Julia nodded. Yes. You'll have support training, a project team, legal resources. You won't be alone, but you'll be leading. He stared at the drawings, letting the weight of it settle. I've led construction crews, he said slowly, but I've never led something like this. That's exactly why I want you, she said. This isn't just about building walls. It's about building trust. You don't walk into a broken neighborhood with a clipboard and expect people to fall in line. You show up like you did that night. You see people. That's leadership, Liam. He swallowed, the emotion thickening in his chest. Part awe, part fear. I'm not used to being the guy people look to. Julia stepped closer, her voice softer. Then, get used to it. They spent the next hour going over timelines, resources, and team assignments. Liam asked questions, good ones, and Julia answered without condescension. When he voiced concerns, she listened not just politely but with interest. By the end of the meeting, he wasn't just considering the job, he wanted it. As they wrapped up, Julia handed him a folder. Read through this tonight. It's everything you'll need. First on-site meeting is Wednesday. I'll be there with you. Liam accepted it, glancing at the cover South Shore site plan. Phase 1. Something about seeing his neighborhood's name in bold print on official letterhead stirred something in him. It felt like ownership, like redemption. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked, watching her. Julia paused, then said carefully, "Because when I was 8, my mom got evicted from our apartment in Bronzeville. It was December. We slept in our car for 3 nights before a church took us in." Liam's expression softened. "I made a promise to myself," she continued. "If I ever had power, I'd build something that didn't forget people like her." She turned to him, eyes steady. "And I can't do it alone." He nodded slowly. "You won't have to." Later that afternoon, Liam picked up Ellie from school. She ran toward him, her backpack bouncing and hair flying in the wind. He scooped her up mid-stride, spinning her once before planting her gently on the ground. "You smell like sawdust and coffee," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Good. That's what progress smells like." She grinned. "Did you go to your new job?" "I did. And guess what? We're going to help rebuild places that help families." Ellie's eyes widened. "Like the place with the soup and art supplies." "Exactly like that." "Are you the boss?" He chuckled. "Sort of. But it's more about helping the right people do the right work." She thought about that, then nodded solemn. "Mommy would like that." Liam blinked, the words hitting with soft, unexpected force. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think she would." That night, while Ellie colored at the table, Liam read through the folder Julia had given him. It was thick with numbers charts, zoning maps, but also handwritten notes in the margins. Notes in Julia's looping cursive: "Include local artist proposal here. Playground design, community-led hire from within, no outsourcing unless absolutely necessary." Every page told the same story. This wasn't a vanity project. It was a mission. He looked over at Ellie, who was now sketching something with crayons. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She held it up. It was a building, a big one with windows and people holding hands on the roof. "It's a place where nobody's cold and nobody's left out," she said proudly. He stared at it, heart swelling. "That's a good place," he said. She beamed. "You can build it, right?" Liam looked back at the plans, then at the girl who still believed anything was possible. "I think I already am." The wind off Lake Michigan bit sharp that Wednesday morning, but it couldn't cut through the warmth building in Liam Harris's chest. He stood at the edge of the vacant South Shore lot, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes scanning what would soon become the beating heart of something new. The ground was nothing but frostbitten earth and gravel. Rusted fencing lined the perimeter, graffiti scrawled across it in faded blues and reds. In the distance, a couple of kids on bikes slowed to watch the small cluster of people assembling near a white van emblazoned with the Roots Rebuilt logo. Liam had been in dozens of sites just like this, dead land forgotten by city planners and too risky for developers. But today was different. Today, he was leading the crew. And this land wasn't just a project. It was a promise. Julia arrived a few minutes later, stepping out of a black SUV with a travel mug and an energy that, despite her exhaustion, still somehow commanded attention. She approached Liam with a familiar smile. "You showed up," she teased. "I said I would. Yeah, but you wore a real shirt and everything." He chuckled, glancing down at his navy flannel. "This is my real shirt." She sipped her coffee, eyes on the lot. "Hard to imagine in 6 months this place will hold classrooms, a food pantry, a clinic wing, and a playground." Liam nodded. "You know what I see? What a patch of ground that's been waiting for someone to care." She turned to him, then something softer in her gaze. "Then, let's be the people who care." The morning kicked off with site introductions. Julia spoke first, brief, confident, not a word wasted. She introduced Liam not as a contractor, but as project lead. When she said the words, "a man whose heart is as steady as his hands," the crew of laborers, volunteers, and nonprofit reps gave him their full attention. He felt the weight of it, and surprisingly, it didn't scare him. He stepped forward and addressed the group, speaking not from notes, but from his gut. "I know what it's like to feel forgotten," he said plainly, to stand on the wrong side of opportunity. But this project, this isn't about ribbon cuttings. It's about doing something with our hands and hearts that lasts longer than cement. It's about building a place where our kids feel safe, our elders feel seen, and no one walks through those doors wondering if they belong. Silence followed for half a second. Then someone clapped. Then another. And soon the applause was real genuine from people who knew what it meant to feel invisible and saw in Liam someone who saw them back. By midday, the crew had begun clearing debris, setting up measuring tapes, staking the corners of the building. Liam moved through the lot like he belonged there, checking measurements, cracking jokes, offering help without barking orders. Julia watched from a distance, arms folded across her chest, the winter air painting pink into her cheeks. "You were right," said a voice beside her. She turned. Angela Bryant, head of operations, had arrived quietly, her wool coat catching bits of wind. "He's not a polished exec," Julia said. "No," Angela agreed. "He's better." They watched as Liam helped a teen volunteer from the local youth center tie rebar into the first support grid. The boy beamed at the praise. It was probably the first time anyone had called his work precise. "He connects without trying," Julia murmured. Angela glanced sideways. "You trust him?" "With this, yes." And with more than this, Julia hesitated. Because the truth was, she wasn't sure if the stirrings she felt when Liam looked at her were about admiration or something deeper. He wasn't part of her world. He didn't play power games or speak in polished metaphors. He was simple, grounded, solid, and maybe that's what scared her. Or maybe what healed her. Around 2 p.m., a white-haired woman approached the fence. She wore a faded scarf and leaned on a walker. Liam noticed her immediately and walked over. "You need help, ma'am?" The woman smiled. "No, honey. I used to live in the building that stood here, before they tore it down. Just wanted to see what was coming next." He looked toward the lot. "We're building something better," he said. Her eyes moistened. Then maybe all that pain wasn't wasted. He offered his arm and she took it for balance. "What was it like?" he asked. She smiled. Loud. Full of kids. The walls were thin, but the laughter was thick. Liam grinned. "Then we'll build walls thick enough to hold the new laughter." That evening, Julia found Liam in the back of the lot rolling up measuring tape and brushing dust from his jacket. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows that made the empty field look almost sacred. "You've got a way with people," she said. He looked up. "I'm just listening." Most people listen to respond. You listen to understand. He didn't respond right away. Then said, "People don't need saving. They just need someone to stand beside them until they remember how strong they are." She nodded, looking out at the staked earth already alive with energy. "I think this place is going to be something special." "It already is," he said, "because it's the first place I've been in a long time that doesn't make me feel small." Julia turned to him. "Liam," she said carefully, "what would you say if I told you I don't think we met by accident?" He studied her a moment. "I'd say, I don't believe in accidents anymore." And in the quiet between them, under the golden, fading light of a city ready for change, something invisible but unmistakable began to build. Not with bricks, but with trust. The morning sun hit the windows of the nearly finished community center, glinting off the fresh glass panes like a silent anthem of progress. What once had been an empty frost-bitten lot was now alive with the sound of power tools, laughter, and purpose. Cement had dried into the bones of a building that meant more than shelter. It meant healing. Inside the main hall, Liam knelt beside a newly installed bench, checking its bolts for the third time. His hands were rough-cracked from winter air and weeks of labor, but they moved with care, not just for the wood, but for what it symbolized, a place for someone to finally sit down and be seen. The center was nearly complete. The roof was sealed, the wiring passed inspection, and local kids had even helped paint a mural on the far wall. In it, a circle of people stood hand in hand beneath a tree with roots spreading in every direction. Roots rebuilt. It was Ellie who'd suggested the design, and Ellie who now came running through the double doors, her backpack thudding against her spine, her braids bouncing. "Daddy. Daddy, come quick." Liam stood. "What's wrong?" She was out of breath but beaming. "It's the little boy from the apartments, the one with the big dog. He fell on the sidewalk by the alley. He's bleeding, and his arm looks weird. Miss Jean said she tried to call an ambulance, but they're delayed because of the pileup on 67th. Liam's heart seized. "Where is he now? They're bringing him here." Without another word, Liam grabbed his jacket and bolted outside. A crowd had gathered at the edge of the construction zone. Miss Jean, a retired nurse and local community leader, stood beside a small boy whose face was pale and pinched with pain. His arm hung limp at his side, twisted slightly. Blood ran down to his fingertips. "He fell off his bike," Miss Jean explained. "We called 911, but the dispatcher said they're backed up. I didn't know where else to go." Liam looked down at the boy, then over at the clinic wing of the community center, not officially open but functional. "Bring him in?" Someone hesitated. "But we're not licensed yet." Liam turned. "We don't need a license to stop bleeding and stabilize a fracture. We just need a heart." He carried the boy gently in his arms, Ellie holding the boy's bike behind him like a soldier guarding treasure. Inside, Liam placed the child on one of the padded benches and called over Maya Julia's assistant, who happened to be helping catalog supplies that day. Maya had some EMT training, and together with Miss Jean, they cleaned the wound and fashioned a splint. By the time the ambulance arrived, 20 minutes later, the bleeding had stopped, the pain was managed, and the boy had stopped crying. A paramedic gave Liam a nod of genuine respect. "Who set the fracture?" Liam shrugged. "Miss Jean. I just held his hand." The medic grinned. "Good job. You saved us a lot of time." Julia arrived minutes later, her car skidding slightly into the icy lot. "I heard the call come through dispatch," she said, breathless, as she jogged toward the clinic doors. "Is he?" "Stable," Liam said. "He's on his way to the hospital now." Julia took him in dust on his sleeves, blood on his hands, sweat at his brow, and something inside her swelled with a pride that was unfamiliar but real. "I guess this center passed its first test," she murmured. Liam gave a tired smile. It wasn't just the building. It was the people inside it. She stepped closer, her voice softer. "People like you." He didn't answer right away. His chest rose and fell, the adrenaline still fading. "I used to think my hands were only good for holding tools," he said. "But lately, it feels like maybe they were meant to hold more." Julia blinked, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his voice. He turned to her. "Thank you for not just seeing me, but trusting me." Julia's eyes held his. "Thank you for proving what I hoped was true, that doing the right thing still matters. That good men still lead." She hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from her coat. "I wasn't sure when to show you this," she said, handing it to him. Liam unfolded it carefully. At the top, it read, "The Heiress Family Center, dedicated to community compassion and second chances." Beneath was a rendering of the front of the building, and above the door, etched into a limestone slab, was his family name. Liam froze. "I didn't ask for this," he said quietly. Julia's voice was steady. "I know. That's why you deserve it." His throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything. Just know that every child who walks through those doors, every parent who brings their kid in for help, every elder who finds warmth here, they'll be walking into something you built. Not just with your hands, Liam, but with your heart." He looked at her then, not as a CEO, not as the woman he once gave a place in line, but as Julia, the woman who believed in things that didn't have price tags. And in that moment, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but irrevocably. That night, back at home, Liam tucked Ellie into bed. She held his wrist before he could leave. "Daddy?" she asked. "Yeah, baby, that boy. He's gonna be okay. He's gonna be just fine." She smiled sleepily. "That building is magic. I told you." He kissed her forehead. "You were right." She looked up at him through heavy lids. "Is it still going to be ours?" It always was. And outside, in the quiet dark, the Harris Family Center stood no longer just brick and mortar, but a living testament to what one act of kindness could become when someone refused to walk away. Spring arrived gently that year, the kind that didn't trumpet its arrival but revealed itself through small kindnesses, buds pushing through cracked sidewalks, coats traded for sweaters, laughter blooming in backyards. And in the heart of South Shore, where a forgotten lot had once sat dormant beneath frost and rust, something new now stood proud. The Harris Family Center was open. It breathed. It sang. And it welcomed every soul who stepped through its wide glass doors. The grand opening wasn't flashy. No ribbon-cutting ceremony with city officials, no fireworks or media circus. That had been Julia's call. This place isn't for headlines, she'd told her board. It's for the people who never make them. Instead, it was families, dozens of them, gathered in folding chairs on a sunny Saturday morning, holding paper cups of lemonade and watching their children race barefoot across the freshly seeded lawn. Local artists hung paintings in the hallways. Volunteers set up tables stacked with school supplies, gently used clothes, books donated from neighborhood churches and synagogues. There were faces from every walk of life. And at the center of it all, standing by the front door in a button-down shirt his daughter had picked out, was Liam Harris. He greeted every guest, not like a politician, like a neighbor. Miss Jean brought brownies and hugged him twice. The white-haired woman who once lived in the torn-down building wiped her eyes when she saw the mural her grandson had helped paint inside. Marco, the contractor who had given Liam odd jobs in darker times, showed up in a clean shirt and gave him a long, quiet handshake that said more than words ever could. Liam turned to see Ellie standing by the check-in desk directing kids to the art room with a clipboard in her hand and a pencil tucked behind her ear like she owned the building. Julia stood beside him, watching with a grin. "She's going to take over this place in 5 years," she said. Liam smiled. "Make it 3. They stood in silence watching Ellie laugh with 2 boys over marker stains on their hands. Julia glanced sideways. "Do you ever think about that night?" The ER. She nodded. Liam looked out over the courtyard where someone had just begun strumming an acoustic guitar. "I think about it every day. Not because I think I did something big, but because it reminded me that small things matter more than we ever know." Julia was quiet a moment, then said, "I wasn't supposed to be at that hospital. I was supposed to be at a board dinner across town. I just couldn't face another room full of suits talking about problems they've never lived." "You walked into that ER looking for something," Liam said softly. "I did," she admitted. "I didn't know what, but I found you." He turned to her, his voice calm but full. "And I found something, too. I found the part of myself I thought had died with Jenna." Her eyes softened. "I used to think purpose was something handed to people," he said. "That maybe I'd missed my shot. But then you walked in, and everything changed." Julia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Folded. Familiar. "I have something for you," she said. Liam unfolded it. It was a medical chart. His, or rather Ellie's. The original ER intake form from that night. Her name. His name. The timestamp. And at the bottom, a line added later in bold black ink transfer of slot patient voluntarily gave up a place in queue for another in critical condition. Underneath it, a handwritten note from the attending nurse. He didn't ask for recognition, but he deserves to be remembered. Liam stared at the page, his throat tight. Julia touched his arm. "This is going into our archive at Greenstone. Not because it's policy, because it's a reminder of what kind of world we're trying to build." He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his inside pocket over his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. "No," Julia said, voice catching. "Thank you." As the sun climbed high, a small choir of neighborhood kids stood in front of the crowd and sang. Their voices weren't perfect, but they were true, clear, hopeful, rising into the breeze like a prayer made of joy. Liam sat beside Ellie in the front row, Julia at his other side. The folding chairs creaked. A baby cried somewhere in the back. 2 teens laughed too loudly during a high note, and it was perfect. Because it was real. Because every person there knew what it meant to be seen, to be heard, to be offered a second chance. Later, as dusk painted the sky with streaks of lavender and gold, Liam walked the empty hallways of the center. The mural caught the last of the sun. The tree in the painting, its roots wide and tangled its branches open, seemed to glow. He stopped beneath it, closed his eyes, and let it sink in. This place, this life, this moment. None of it would have happened if he hadn't done something that didn't make sense on paper, something unremarkable, something deeply human. He had simply chosen kindness. And now, written in stone above the entrance shining under the stars, the Harris Family Center. A place to begin again. And for Liam Harris, and for Julia Jennings, and for everyone who ever wondered if the smallest act could really change the world. The answer, now and forever, was yes. What about you? Have you ever witnessed a moment of quiet kindness that changed everything? Or maybe you've been the one who made that small choice that rippled into something bigger. Let us know in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories and seeing how far these messages of hope and humanity can travel. If this story moved, inspired you, or simply reminded you that goodness still exists, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in the power of one small act.